Chapter 26. The Star. The Star. A long, long time, and a very long time, to me, way, hey, I-O, a smart Yankee packet lay out in the bay a long time ago. Capstan Shanty. For 22 hours after the appearance of the fluffy yellow warbler, the Queen of Asia forged slowly ahead in a light, fair wind. Then, out of the fog and midst ahead and to starboard, bleak, snow-covered mountains seemed suddenly to rear their massive, cone-shaped heads far into the dull sky. It was land, but such land, desolate, forbidding, lifeless. A point or two off the port bow was an opening, Unimak Pass, the Bering Sea. Bert Lindsay paused at the break of the poop to gaze, fascinated and awestruck, at the cold magnificence of the spectacle. Then a tremendous sigh seemed to pass softly over the vessel, and every sail fell slack. The bark rolled in the slow Pacific swell. The sails filled aback with a great slapping of heavy canvas against ropes and masts. "Hard a-weather," barked the captain, and with the last of her way the bark turned sluggishly away from the pass. Her sails filled, emptied, filled aback, emptied again, becalmed, an hour's sail from the pass. The helmsman struck 4 bells. Bert took his place at the wheel. Captain Hagestrom paced back and forth in front of the wheelhouse in nervous haste, his lips moving continuously. The third kept discreetly out of his way, as did the doctor, who stood leaning against the starboard rail. The sails shivered for a moment as a gentle breeze reached them, blowing straight from the pass. It died as quickly as it came. Bert saw the captain purse his lips and blow toward the idle sails. Blowing for a wind, the boy thought. I'd better help. So filling his lungs, he added his efforts to the captain's. The captain began to mutter aloud his prayers to the wind god. "Come on, fair wind," he said. "Blow, little breeze. Blow. Come on, fair wind. Get us through the pass. Blow, breeze, blow." Bert's trick came to an end, and still the restless master paced and muttered. "We may lie here for 2 weeks before we get a slant of wind through the pass," the third remarked glumly, as Bert paused for a moment by his side. "That is, if we don't pile up on the rocks." Unconsciously borrowing something of the mood of the captain and third mate, Bert returned to the main deck. At the foot of the poop steps, he found a group of perhaps 25 Mexicans and Negroes laughing and scoffing good-naturedly at a stunted black man who harangued them in the name of piety and virtue. The young seaman surmised that the self-appointed preacher had chosen this spot to deliver his sermon with a view to being heard on the poop. He even imagined that the black was talking more for the benefit of the 3 or 4 seamen on the outskirts of the group than with any intention of winning his fellow tween-deckers to repentance. Curious, he joined the seamen, and he was sure that the preacher noted his arrival with satisfaction. "As I was saying, and I now repeats," the Negro was crying earnestly, "Brothers, we has fallen into temptation and error. The Lord am looking at us and saying with tears in his eyes, 'Look at how devil has seduced them po' chillun of mine.' Brothers, the devil, he don't come to us breathing fire and brimstone. That's what we get afterwards. The devil, he comes talking soft and saying, 'Here, boy, take a sniff of this here stuff, and you'll feel like a $1 million white man.' That's what the devil's saying. Talking soft, the devil he. Never mind the devil." Bert looked up, startled to see Captain Hagestrom leaning over the rail at the break of the poop. For all his worry, there was a twinkle in his eyes. "Never mind the devil," said the captain. "But if you're any good at praying, get us a fair wind." "Yes, sir, Captain, yes, sir," the preacher cried eagerly. "Brothers, let us unite in prayer for a fair wind. Oh, Lord!" As Bert strolled forward, feeling more cheerful again, 3 or 4 tween-deckers greeted him. The China gang, at least, was willing to let bygones be bygones. The crew was glum over the lack of wind, but the seamen, too, seemed to have forgotten the recent battle. Bert joined von Bergen by the bulwarks in the waist of the vessel. "In Unimak Pass, many good ships have gone on the rocks," said the German. "The last was this spring, a sealing schooner from the Pribilof Islands with a full cargo of furs." The boy shuddered. The inference was obvious. Many times he had heard the seaman remark that this stormy pass was the most dangerous part of a Bering Sea voyage. What a fitting end to a voyage that has been nothing but trouble and bad luck, he thought. There would be a jar, a rending of steel plates. Perhaps some men would get ashore before the bark slipped from the rock and disappeared. He shook himself mentally in an effort to throw off his morbid imaginings. Then the wind came, a leading wind. It was light and uncertain, but nevertheless the bark moved with squared yards toward the pass. By 4 bells of the afternoon watch, the dark, rounded form of Scotch Cap showed dimly through the mist off the starboard beam, while the diaphone on the cap sent its dismal moan out across the dangerous waters. The bark was fairly in the pass. 10 miles to port, Ugamic Island appeared like a wraith for a moment through a rift in the mist, then vanished as completely as though the sea had swallowed it up. At times, even the hostile rocky cliffs of Unimak Island to starboard were blotted out. At the beginning of the dog watches, a seaman, fresh from a trick at the wheel, pointed into the fog off their starboard beam. "The mate says Cape Sarashef is over there," he announced. "We're through the pass." Through the pass, in the Bering Sea. Already Bert felt as though the voyage were safely ended. But what was the matter with the vessel? Something was lacking. Why, it was the motion. The bark still slipped through the water at perhaps 4 knots, but the deck was as steady as a ballroom floor. Except for the week in Honolulu Harbor, the bark had been in ceaseless motion since the day she passed out through the Golden Gate. A rhythmical roll and heave and fall had come to be a normal condition of life, and now its stoppage left the boy with a feeling of incompleteness, as had the absence of the 'tween-decks hum the night after the battle. Bert stood the second dog watch that night with a light heart, when a fellow seaman roused him a few minutes before 4 o'clock in the morning for the morning watch. The warm sun had already started on its long journey around the horizon. So balmy was the air that he stood the early watch without his heavy jacket. This was not what he had expected of the Bering Sea. It had been in another mood when it had earned its nickname of the Stormy Sea. For 4 days the bark moved slowly over glassy or gently rippled waters while men in their shirt sleeves fished for cod during half hours of calm and read Sparks's bulletins reporting drift ice to the north and west. The mammoth white cap of smoking Pavlov, rearing its bald head nearly 9,000 feet into the sky, appeared on the second day off the starboard bow, 70 miles away. On the 4th day, it vanished into the clear blue air astern. In the murky dawn of the 5th day, with a freshening breeze from the north, the ice came. All day long the bark skirted the floe, battering her bows against stray chunks that had drifted a few yards ahead of the main body. "This is the first ice any salmon packet has seen since 1918, when the ice sank the Tacoma and drove 2 other ships ashore," the third told the boy. "Some of us were on the ice for a week before we got to other ships." "Then you were on board the Tacoma?" Bert asked. "Yes," said the third reflectively. "I was a seaman. Carl Jensen was second mate. He was on a drifting floe for 10 days. A lot of fun that was." Bert resolved that he would hear the chief mate's story some day. Through that night the wind continued to freshen, though the ice prevented a sea from rising. All square sails were taken in, except the upper and lower topsails. But still the bark forged ahead at 7 knots. At last the ice was left astern, and on the 6th night after coming through the pass, the main yards were backed, and the vessel hove to wait for daylight. In the morning they would enter the broad mouth of the Nushagak River. Already every man aboard knew that the Alatak would start down from the cannery at daylight to tow the tall sailor up the river to her summer's moorings. Never had officers and men been in such good humor. Men came laughing from their tricks at the wheel to repeat the stories that the mates had told. Even the master unbent so far as to swap yarns with the mates and pass bantering remarks with the flattered helmsman. Bert was exultant. He was proud of the gallant Queen of Asia, proud of her master, proud of the men who manned her, and happy over his small share of the credit for bringing the vessel safe through the hazards of her voyage. What could men like Dopey J, Pete Condon, Dr. Hayes, and Poker Gus do against the solid honesty and grim adherence to duty of such men as Captain Hagstrom, Carl Jensen, Charlie Hansen, and the stalwart crew of rough and ready fishermen sailors. The men might grumble over their work and curse the bark and its officers and the company that hired them, but when it came to a showdown, they were square-rigged like the vessel they manned. And even Q, master of cutthroats and dope peddlers, stopping at nothing to attain his unknown ends, even Q was powerless against the wooden-legged cook's pride in a duty well performed. An hour after daylight, Bert was awakened by a cry from the deck. "The Star! The Star! The mailboat!" The boy turned over and buried his head in his pillow. It was not his watch on deck. What if the mailboat was coming? But 5 minutes later he was up and dressing. Under a smudge of black smoke over the port quarter, the high-sided gray hull of the little steamer was rapidly taking form. The young seaman's heart beat quicker. Mail from home. The Star would pass them and go on up the river, whose distant banks showed as a thin, hard line on the horizon. When they reached the cannery, their mail would be waiting for them. But the steamer held straight on toward the bark, white foam curling away from its bow. It was a chunky dog with a bone in its teeth. Slackening speed as it drew near, the Star ranged slowly alongside 100 yards away. Bert saw deckhands hoisting a boat from its chocks. The boat swung outward. Several men climbed in, and it was lowered to the water. Bert noticed casually that one of the men wore a business suit, which contrasted sharply with the rough, loose clothes of the seaman. Suddenly struck by something familiar in the man's profile as he sat in the stern sheets of the boat, Bert looked more closely. It looked like, but it couldn't be. Then the boat turned toward the bark and drew quickly nearer, impelled by the strong strokes of 2 oarsmen. It couldn't be, but it was. Bert's heart jumped. Snatching off his knitted cap, he waved wildly, and the man in the stern of the small boat waved in answer. It was Hargrave.